All right, great. It looks like we've leveled out and we have at least a good chunk of our participants already have joined in. Welcome everyone to our webinar on cultivating investor relationships at your university. I'm Kirsten Leute of Osage University Partners, and I'll be your moderator today. This webinar will focus on what academic institutions are doing to foster and cement relationships with investors potentially interested in funding academic startups. Joining us to discuss their experiences at their respective universities are Rob Halford of Duke University and Mike Sorathakis of University of Michigan. Some of you may remember and recognize Mike from last year's webinar on talent recruiting. Rob, do you want to start us off by telling us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, Kirsten, thanks. I started my career after graduate school in the labs at Eli Lilly and Company as a chemist. I have not pipetted anything since 1998, which is too recent for my taste. After that, I moved into various strategy roles in big pharma at Lilly, research portfolio management, diabetes strategy, and ultimately Lilly Ventures. After that, I got my MBA at Duke and started my post-MBA career at Pappas Ventures, a local life science venture capital firm here in Durham, North Carolina. I landed at Duke in the Tech Transfer Office, or the Office of Licensing and Ventures, as we refer to it, about 10 years ago as a licensing manager. 4 years ago, we got a new executive director, Robin Racer. Actually, that's the next piece. Sorry, that's my career. Reading my script here, I got busted.
Great.
Should I jump in?
Yeah, so Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself, and we're going to have each talk about your programs in just a bit.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Sorathakis from the University of Michigan Tech Transfer Venture Center. I'm also the managing director of the newly announced Accelerate Blue Fund. My background is mostly in corporate and state-supported venture. I ran a venture fund for Forest Health Services, as well as a $250 million series of programs that invested in early-stage startups across the state of Michigan to help diversify the economy beyond auto industry that was funding out of the tobacco settlement. Also been involved in a number of startups, mostly on the internet tech side. I joined the University of Michigan 6 years ago as associate director for physical science in the Venture Center, and about 2.5 years ago, moved up to the director position and worked for Rob's current boss, worked with Rob's current boss for many years, so enjoyed that as well.
Great. Thank you both for joining us today and for sharing your experiences with our audience. Among the topics that we're going to discuss today are initial contacts with investors made through the universities, regional versus non-regional venture capital connections, keeping track of the university-associated startups, connecting investors to those startups, pitch competitions and other on-campus events, and diligence on investors. We will also cover new strategies and programs that panelists are pursuing or have heard about in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. We encourage you to submit relevant questions throughout the webinar today. And if you would like to submit a question at any point, please use the Q&A feature that you see on your toolbar, either at the bottom or the top of your screen.
So I came to my role as, my current role as Director of New Ventures. The sort of seeds of this were planted about 4 years ago when Robin Racer, our executive director, came to us from Ohio State by way of some other university that name eludes me currently. Maybe something will trigger my memory at some point. And when she arrived, we took a look at the metrics and ranked ourselves relative to our peer institutions. And across the board, you know, there was room for growth, but there was one particular area, the formation of startup companies, where we were at the bottom of the list and next to UNC. Now, if you want to persuade the administration at Duke to give you money to do something, a good way to start is to put yourself at the bottom of the list next to UNC. And so using that persuasive strategy, Duke New Ventures was created. And while I like to give my friends at Michigan a hard time, I owe Mike and his team a debt of gratitude. We really started with the playbook that Robin brought with her from the University of Michigan. And I appreciate the time that Mike has spent helping us and the approaches he shared and the materials he shared as we sort of got the program off the ground. So let's go to the next slide. So how is OLB doing as an office? And I would say, we've seen growth in our key metrics over the last few years. I'll leave it to you all to go check out our lovely website and dig in on the metrics that might be of interest to you. But I'll highlight to you, the $58 million in revenue for fiscal year 2019. We're on track to hit $60 million in revenue this year. And that's largely driven by 3 drugs on the market. So let's go on to the next slide and talk about Duke New Ventures. Yeah, so we're coming up on $6 billion in capital raised for Duke startups over the last 25 years. And I would highlight towards the bottom of the left among these metrics, even though we don't have an explicit mandate around economic development, we are seeing more of our startups stay in Durham or in the Triangle area. I should have turned off the auto advance feature before I forwarded the slides. I thought I did that. Sorry. So that's not Natasha doing that. So in the bottom left, yeah, 91% of our startups have stayed in North Carolina over the last couple of years. And I think that's a function of our burgeoning ecosystem here, highlighted by the opening of a biolabs facility here in downtown Durham, which is really nice. In the bottom right-hand corner, we had 2 IPOs in 2019, which includes the crown jewel of the OUP portfolio, Precision Biosciences. I have no insider information, but I suggest you all go long DTIL. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So what's the function of Duke New Ventures and our approach? Our idea was to put a team around our fledgling startups. It starts with the inventors and the invention managers, developing and protecting the intellectual property. But what Duke New Ventures brings to the table is the mentor in residence program. These are based on what we saw at Michigan, former startup executives that work for us 20 hours a week. And because each of them is working on 10 to 15 different projects, it ends up that 20 hours goes pretty quickly. So we engaged with the business students to form the New Venture Fellows program, where we bring a business student in, put them alongside a mentor in residence to help advance the story around the startup over the course of the semester. They get class credit, we get free labor, so everybody wins, which is really nice. And finally, we've been exploring lately mentors in our community, people who have deep expertise in a particular area that we might bring to bear to help on a particular startup. Let's go on to the next slide. So how does this translate then? As I learned at Duke in business school, correlation always equals causation. And since I started in this role for the 2017 fiscal year, clearly I'm responsible for taking us from a run rate of 5 to 10 startups a year to now setting records each of the last 3 years or equaling them. And we are well on pace to break the record of 16 startups that we had the last couple of years here in fiscal year 2020. I think we've got about that number right now. Let's go on to the next slide. So Duke New Ventures process. Our goal is to take our startups to the point where they have capital to reach an inflection point and a management team to execute and deploy that capital, or what we call graduation. For the purpose of this conversation, I really want to focus on the refinement and venture development segments of this. So refinement is where we do most of our work, taking things that we think could make good startups and helping them tell their story. What's their value proposition? Who's their competition? What's the unmet need that they're solving? Sort of startup 101 type of stuff. And when we feel like the story has come to a point where it's ready to make introductions to investors, we have the team come in and present to our staff meeting. And once they've successfully presented to our group, gotten feedback and incorporated that, then we move them into the venture development stage, where we are actively introducing them to investors. And so that's sort of the key turning point there. And before they come and talk to us and show that they can tell their story, we're a little more reluctant to sort of put them in front of investors. Let's go on to the next slide. So other approaches we do in terms of connecting to investors, we had 2 showcase days last year. These are designed to match the companies on stage most closely with the investors in the audience based on capital needs and industries of interest. So the Venture Day was really for companies with large capital needs. These are primarily our drug-focused companies, our therapeutics companies. And so we tried to pack the audience with investment firms that were interested in that particular area and had capital deploy in that vein. Out of that, we had 8 companies on stage. 3 companies got into diligence. We had 1 investment come out of this and 1 term sheet as well. So I think that's a pretty good hit rate given normal venture capital investment rates. Angel Day was basically everything but drugs. Most of our software startups, our medical device startups have smaller capital needs, and angel investors tend to invest a bit more broadly and are maybe less specifically focused. So we put 11 startups on stage, and again, we had some really good conversations coming out of that, maybe some investments pending as well. Let's go on to the next slide. So I'll sort of conclude with a little blurb on the Duke Angel Network. So all of the angels in the Duke Angel Network are Duke affiliated, whether they're alumni, faculty, or staff. And all of the investments are also Duke affiliated. And you can sort of see on the right-hand side of the slide there, the distribution of sort of where the investments have gone. And so while we are definitely close, while Duke New Ventures is very close to the Duke Angel Network, and we share a lot of deal flow, they engage just like other investors with a significant diligence process. And each angel will invest on his or her own accord based on whether they're interested in the deal or not. Okay, and let's go to the next slide. That's about it. Feel free to reach out to me after the webinar if you have questions or whatever. And thanks a lot for including me, Kirsten.
Absolutely. No, so happy to have you. And thanks for that great intro to the program that you guys have been building up at Duke for the last several years now. Mike, let's go on to your slides. And just FYI, before Mike started, there's been a bunch of questions back and forth about some background presentation that may be happening. Apparently, when some people opened the webinar, there was also a link to our portal site, which may actually be have started an automatic video about the portal itself. So if you hear that, that's what it may be, and it's also why not everyone's hearing another presentation going on in the background. So, all right, Mike, sorry about that.
No problem at all. Hi, everyone. Again, Mike Sarathakis. You can actually go to the next slide. This is just an intro slide. Gotcha. So I want to give a little background on the university as a whole. U of M is the largest public research university in the United States. Last fiscal year, we had about $1.6 billion research enterprise. We've had about over 7,500 invention disclosures since 2000. You can go to the next slide. More granularly and recently, fiscal year 2019, we had 502 invention disclosures, which puts us in the top 3 in the country behind MIT and Stanford, 22 startups and 232 licensing agreements. And I'm happy to hear, as Rob has also said, that we're on track to beat all of these metrics for this year, given, even under the current circumstances. Probably close to 30 startups already, and might exceed that number before the year end, which is end of June. So we're excited about the results from this year. Next slide. More to topic on what we're discussing today. We've had 264 startups since 2000. They've raised about $4.4 billion in venture capital, and we've had about $3.7 billion in liquidity events. Shout out to Osage for helping us track all these numbers. It's a valuable resource they provide to us, and that we cross-check with each other to make sure our numbers are accurate, especially in the venture capital and liquidity events, because obviously some of these companies mature and aren't as engaged with us down the road. And so hearing about small exits is really valuable to keeping track of these numbers. Next slide. So overview of how our office is structured. We're very integrated between licensing and the venture team. We We have a mentor in residence program that's very valuable on the startup side, but also valuable in assessing new invention disclosures as they come through the office. So our team, both sides, work together in assessing new inventions, understanding the best path for them, and we're agnostic as to whether it's going to be a startup or a licensed industry. Great support team, and Kelly Sexton from North Carolina State previously joined our office about 2.5 years ago, replacing Ken Nesbitt, who retired at that time. So a lot of activity through our office, a really outstanding team. And I think one of the unusual aspects is how closely the licensing, the venture team work together in their activity to figure out commercialization strategies and tap into the resources that we're fortunate to have inside the university to move things along. Next slide. So I'm putting up an example here as kind of an overview of what we have done, and a successful example at that. So Genomenon is in the genome sequencing and analytical space. They have really cool technology that was developed by Mark Klein out of the med school. And invention disclosure came in. Mark brought it to the office, and we engaged with him fairly quickly to explore opportunities for how this would move forward. Assigned a mentor in residence, Mike Klein, who joined us and took advantage of funding resources inside the university. MTRAC's a program, for example, that's supported by the state of Michigan, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, to explore translational research and help advance that, as well as commercial rollout. Genomenon signed a license with the office. We spun them out, and they took office space in our accelerator. We have an on-site incubator space in the former Pfizer facility that purchased back in 2007. So we have lab and office space, world-class. It's unfortunately empty right now due to COVID, but a really dynamic area. And it's nice to have the teams, especially when they're first rolling out, close to us so that we can engage and support them. Mike joined that team, and as CEO, Mark moved to the Chief Scientific Officer space. And then again, more on the investment track. We're fortunate to have some investment funds inside the university beyond Accelerate Blue. The Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund jumped in with their first investment, along with some local angel investors, which helped the company product launch, and then have MINTS, which is out of the investment office, the endowment co-investment fund, invest. During this entire time, we have a report, which I'll talk about a little bit later, going out and giving information to investors across the country on the status of how this project, as well as others, are developing, as well as once the company's launched. And today, in no small part, in my opinion, on the support they've received through the university, the company has grown. It's been able to raise several rounds, including one currently, a bridge round. And, they graduated from the accelerator, and they're doing great things, and they are local. Next slide. Also wanted to touch briefly on the Accelerate Blue Fund. We think this will have an impact on our communication with investors. Accelerate Blue was approved by the Regents this past October. It's a $20 million tech fund that we're going to raise through philanthropy, so it's not active yet. But just the announcement of the fund opened the door to some funds across the country that we had not engaged with, and we're very proactive in that space. So we expect having a tool like this run through our office will be very valuable in engaging with investors and helping our companies get engaged with them, or even the projects. Next slide. I think that might be it, actually. Yep, that's it. Sorry. I think you can go back. I think this is for
We're going to cover that one soon. Yeah. So it sounds like some people may still have trouble hearing just because an extra tab opened when the Zoom thing opened. So again, check your tabs. We're not hearing anything as the presenters. And so if there are extra tabs open, including the portal tab may have opened when the Zoom meeting opened, that may be what's causing an issue. So we apologize for that, but we are recording this, so in case this isn't working for you, we will provide you this afterwards. So let's try and jump right into kind of the heart of this conversation that we're having today, which is, you know, I'd love to hear from each of you how you've created a list of curated investor contacts that you use. And Rob, why don't we start off with you?
Yeah, sure. You know, it starts with personal networks. You know, I worked in venture for a while, a couple of different firms. But my network aside, you know, the mentors and residents have been invaluable in you know, finding and introducing VCs to the group. Several of them have worked in VC or have done angel investing themselves, and all of them have worked with investors. So having that group and their connections at our disposal has been huge. The second piece is really about developing the relationships. You know, I go to the JP Morgan healthcare event every year, not actually attending the conference, just going from hotel room to hotel room, which is just as seedy as it sounds. And then, of course, we have, you know, Venture Day and Angel Day. And we also try to invite groups down to have an individual sort of audience with faculty, you know, that maybe are a little earlier in their thinking in terms of, you know, the research they're doing and the applicability to a startup. And that leads us to sort of the third stage, which is finding out who's serious. You know, obviously, you know, you think more relationships are better, but, you know, not everybody's willing to get on a plane and come down to Durham and meet with our faculty. But those who are and those who provide good feedback are the people that get first look at our pipeline and our portfolio. And those are the first people reach out to. And then the final note I'd make is that, you know, I've intentionally targeted, especially in the Boston and Bay Area firms, principals and non-partners in the firms. You know, these are people who are looking to make their mark. And if they're gonna, you know, if they're in Boston and they go to Harvard or MIT to try to interact with faculty, a lot of those faculty already have relationships with partners at the local firms. And so I find that those people are a little hungrier, a little more willing to come down. And Duke is kind of a white space where they can build relationships and hopefully find that diamond in the rough.
Great, thanks, Mike. How about you, cultivating those relationships?
Sure. So much of the same. We go to JP Morgan, not the actual conference, but the space around that. We also go to South by Southwest Interactive. There's a lot of tech investors there, as well as bio. So we try to get a team presence in all of those spaces. Again, in some of those cases, it's licensing and venture there, so we can engage with as many people as possible. The venture team is certainly more focused on meeting with investors at those events. We're fortunate to have two big investor-related events in the ecosystem. One is the Midwest Growth Capital Symposium, which is run out of the Ross School of Business. They bring investors from across the country, so that's a really wonderful opportunity to get people on campus, have face-to-face meetings, have you know, companies and even some projects do presentations, and they provide that opportunity not only at the event, but we have meetings typically outside of that event. You know, that's been ongoing for well over 30 years. So that's really wonderful. Renaissance Ventures, which is a fund-to-fund based out of Ann Arbor and Detroit, also has something called Undemo Day, which has also become a quite significant event that we have a fairly large presence there. It's not a U of M related event, but we work very closely with them. And often it is in one of it is on campus. Again, like the Midwest Growth Capital Symposium, we have the opportunity to meet with investors face-to-face, as well as tee up meetings with our projects and startups that are potentially seeking capital or are seeking capital. We do like to develop relationships broadly, and we're pretty aggressive in that respect. So we also, because of kind of the volume and the connections that we've been able to garner over the years, we actively use PitchBook to check out investors and see, you know, what their history is, what kind of capital they have available, what their real interests are, and having that information when you meet with them or after you meet with them, if it's, you know, serendipity at a conference, is really valuable in understanding what they're looking for and how they will be able to engage with us. You know, is there going to be real meaning there, or we're not going to spend, you know, as much effort there? But we're we're, I would say, aggressively open to having a relationship, even if there's not something there immediately, because of our volume, there probably will be something there in the future.
And honestly, Mike, you just led me right into my next question. So thank you for that, which was, you know, so you have a new investor contact or, you know, someone that you haven't met before, or it's very fresh. How do you make that valuable and potentially long lasting when you have that initial reach out to that new investor? How do you go about it?
So, you know, one of the things, a lot of people don't realize how big Michigan is. And, you know, and so we, even locally, it's not a national phenomenon. We meet people that live in Ann Arbor who don't understand how big the research enterprise is at University of Michigan. So that's something that we have aggressively, and as you saw in my slide deck, you know, we tee that up right up front, and most people don't know. You know, that results in, wow, I had no idea. You know, the Accelerate Blue Fund's another example where we're much more outward facing and trying to communicate to people that we've got 19 amazing schools at the university, and we're spinning startups out of many of them. Obviously, most come from the med school engineering, but we're seeing more and more activity out of LSA, out of the law school, and other areas. And this is just exclusively, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, you know, these are licensed startups. These aren't student startups. So it's, you know, communicating the opportunities. And we like to say we do everything from cancer to cement, and that's actually true. Gives us the ability to engage with a lot of people at a very high level. And then when we do that, we do have a report that we send out quarterly to give people an idea of what's in our pipeline. And I don't know if you want me to talk about
yes,
that now.
Okay. Natasha, would you mind advancing to the next slide then to the pipeline report?
So we have something called the pipeline report that we send out quarterly. And the investors on this list have to have had at least a soft touch with our office. But we don't obviously know 450 investors intimately. But we think it's important to get our project pipeline out to the community. Obviously, we're only sending things where we're comfortable and communicate them. So it's at a very high level, but it's an Excel spreadsheet they can download into their system. It's actually close to 500 now investors across the country, angels, so they have to be accredited, or obviously VC firms or strategic investors. It typically has about 150 to 170 startup projects, and we segment that out into early stage projects that probably have, you know, many months, if not several years before they're really ready to go. Projects that we're working on that are very close to launching, or there's a lot of momentum behind that project, or projects that have recently turned into companies. And recently, well, it's not that recent anymore, about a year and a half ago, we added a third tab for companies who are actively fundraising or expect to be fundraising in the next 12 to 18 months, and have given us their permission to put them on the list and give a very high level overview of what they're seeking, where they're at, little history. And we stay out of the way of that conversation actually, and just give contact information of the company. Obviously people still reach out to us, and the investors can contact them directly. We've been fortunate in that has opened the door, since we started doing that, to 6 deals that, you know, can't take credit just from an Excel spreadsheet, but it did open the door to that investment opportunity, and those investments have closed. What we keep on that sheet are, you know, the PIs behind it, what sector it's in, obviously the stage, technology readiness level. We've co-opted Steve Blank's investment readiness level by sector. There's definitions around that that are part of the report. And it's, you know, sortable and I think relatively easy to read, so that if someone's only interested in life science, they can just, you know, click on the drop down for life science and click that tab, and that's all they'll see, rather than seeing, you know, everything from all the schools. So it's been a very valuable report, and, you know, we're happy to share it with people.
Great. And you had kindly provided the outline of the report to us at OUP, and we have a version, a kind of blank version of this up on the portal as well, if people want to download this and look at, you know, basically the parameters that are part of this Excel spreadsheet. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and please reach out if you have questions about it
Yes,
and
please
how we
reach
do
out
it.
to Mike about this. This is his and his team's baby. So Rob, same question to you. You have a new investor you'd like to approach. What are the things that you do to cultivate that relationship with that new investor?
I look at my job as sort of curating both ends of a conversation. The whole point of having that distinction between refinement and venture development in our pipeline is such that, I don't want to go and show VCs things that are not quite ready yet, where they can't tell their story. I have a rule for my pharma startups that there's no more than one Western blot allowed per slide deck. And I want them to be able to tell their story in a way that VCs are used to hearing. The typical academic presentation is very much one of, we tried this and it didn't work. And then we tried this other thing and that also didn't work. But then we tried the third thing that didn't work. And that sort of building to a conclusion, it's really to highlight how clever they are as scientists, as opposed to, here's the unmet medical need, here's how our solution fits, here's what the competition does, and here's how we compare. At the same time, I want to curate from the investor side as well. If I introduce people to my faculty who are jerks or don't provide feedback or are not serious about making investments and waste their time, my faculty are going to stop, returning my phone calls and are going to stop taking my introductions. There's no requirement for them to work with me. And the same with the venture investors. If I show them things that are not ready yet or can't tell the story in a way that they can understand it and make an evaluation appropriately, they're gonna stop returning my phone calls as well. So with new investors, it's really about understanding what their interests are and then handpicking a few things that I want to put in front of them at the start to give them a flavor of sort of the work we do and what the opportunities are at Duke.
Great, thanks. I'm gonna, for my next question, I'm kind of gonna blend two questions. So my next question was about what you've done, but that has been particularly helpful in cultivating these relationships. And I'm gonna blend this with actually a question from the audience, which was, how do you attract investors to your venture days, and how do you market it itself? So it's cultivating the relationships, but then going into a specific way, Rob in particular, that you've been doing with the venture days. So Rob, do you want to take this one first?
Right. So there's a couple of things about Venture Day that I think we did right the first time, and there are definitely things we did wrong the first time. But the things we did right was making it invite only. We had a meeting, a happy hour the night before for those who came in from out of town or even those who are local, honestly, who were invited, that are investors only, so they can get together and have conversations with each other, make connections that way. And I think they found that especially valuable. And then on the day, it was really about coaching and curating what went up on stage, making sure that they could tell their story in a effective way. And excuse me. And that way, it's not a situation where, I look at other conferences that are in the local sort of, Research Triangle area, and it's people who are, trying to get venture capitalist attention, or, attorneys, service providers, people who want to work with these startups. And by making it invite only, by limiting the audience, I think that it made it just about finding investable deals. And I think that was a real positive outcome. In terms of marketing it, it was sort of, through the networks that we had. It kicked off at the JP Morgan event. Everybody I talked to, I said, hey, we've got Investor Day. It's going to be in May, mark your calendar. It was really a direct marketing thing. We didn't want to do necessarily word of mouth. But if investors knew other investors that they thought would be of interest, we were able to facilitate it that way. But yeah, we wanted to make it a pretty select event.
Great, thanks. Mike, you already talked about one of the things that you've done that have been helpful in cultivating these relationships with the pipeline report. Are there other programs or events that you've been doing at Michigan that have really helped cultivate these relationships as well?
You know, we do many of the things that Rob talked about. You know, while we do broadly broadcast our pipeline, and, you know, that's a first touch, our team spends a lot of time in working with the PIs and the startup teams to make sure that they're presenting correctly. We do vet our VCs also similarly when we're doing in-person engagement, which is why, especially for the projects, the contact information is with the venture team rather than the PIs directly. Obviously, they can track them down if they want to, and that does happen. And we think that's worth the, you know, the issues that may arise from that, but it typically hasn't been a big problem. You know, we're fortunate in that we have several events beyond the two that I already mentioned in the ecosystem. So we have pitch competitions that our startups go to. We have something that's very similar to South by Southwest Interactive called A2 Tech 360. Most people know it as Tech Trek. That is a very much ecosystem, a community-wide event for technology engagement. And they're starting to have investor activities surrounded, involved with that week-long event, including angel investor groups that come into town, and potentially having the Undemo Day as part of that activity as well. So there's a lot of activity in getting the word out about those, though we're fortunate in that we don't have to put those on ourselves. We are strong supporters and we typically are very involved. We do have an annual event through our office called Celebrate Invention. We do invite many investors there, but it's not an investor themed event. But again, it does communicate what's going on at the university. Some of the highlights, obviously, it's a celebratory event. And that has slowly started to expand as well into talking about grant and investment programs that are available for PIs through the university or tangentially with the university. And again, when you start talking about that, investors start getting interested. And so that's starting to grow, and we're starting to explore other opportunities there.
Great. You both have now brought up vetting investors. Can you talk about what kind of diligence you do on investors? And Mike, we'll start with you.
You know, again, we spend a lot of time in PitchBook. We're fortunate to have a new analyst on the team, and that gives us some really valuable insights. We think as a result, it's worth the licensing fee. It's not an inexpensive tool to use. Many VCs use it, so I would strongly recommend it. We actually just re-upped our license with that after a very careful evaluation of other tools out there, and actually asked Kirsten's team what they thought about those other tools and went to PitchBook. So, you know, give that a look if you have the ability to tap into that. Some schools, the business schools have it, but unfortunately it's not campus-wide because of the cost. You know, we like to have face-to-face meetings as investors get close with our companies. We're often involved with the meetings initially or do phone calls. And, you know, some of it is reputation. There are ways to find out deals that they've done. And, you know, anybody who's been in this game, they have deals that have gone south, and that's not really a black mark. It's, you know, how do they handle those situations? And if we have the opportunity to talk to somebody that's been in that situation with them, you know, that's a great thing. So we're heavy users of LinkedIn as an example, because typically, because of our networks and our MIRs networks and the teams, we know somebody by 1 or 2 degrees of you know, separation, that we can probably get a discussion with them to find out, you know, so how did that go? And that's been a really valuable resource. But, you know, face-to-face meetings is really what it comes down to. And we're always open to that. You know, obviously that's happening by Zoom now, but we do invite investors all the time to come through the office, and that gives us a really good feel for how they're going to engage.
All right, Robin, same question to you, but also can you, in either one of you on this, you know, what are red flags potentially that you look for in that diligence too?
Yeah, I would say for the top tier national venture firms, you know, we don't do a lot of diligence ahead. You know, if NEA wants to send somebody down to meet with our group, you know, we're going to say yes. If they turn out to be a jerk, you know, we write that down. We're happy to give them the benefit of the doubt until they prove otherwise. For other people that I maybe have never heard of, I try to use my network, LinkedIn or whatever, to find out if they're legit. Certainly calling the people at OUP that we work with and seeing if they've worked with them, see if they've heard of them, see if they know them. That's a great starting point for us. The red flag for me is if nobody I know knows this investor, that's not a good sign, right? There's, I'm fine with the cold reach out from investors. It's not always convenient for them to get a warm introduction, and they can pull my name off of a slide or a website and get in touch with me. But I do try to check up on them and make sure that I know somebody who knows them. And I agree with Mike that PitchBook is invaluable that way. Yeah, if they haven't made any investments that show up on PitchBook, also potentially a bad sign.
Yeah. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit right now because we've had a couple questions from the audience now about process and structure of new ventures and licensing. So, this particular question is asking if you can elaborate on the licensing and new ventures teams processes. How do you work together? How does new ventures start getting involved in a particular project? Does it happen early on? Is it something that where people come to you for the most part now? You both have integrated offices. I'd also like to ask you a question about non-integrated offices, but maybe let's deal with that first one first, about how the licensing and ventures team work together, and also how then you're starting to work with the startups themselves at the universities. Rob, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the wide end of our funnel, where our deal flow comes from, is from the invention managers. When they're sitting down with the faculty and discussing, they've all, we didn't have a new ventures group, 4 years ago. And so the invention managers that, have been.
Oh.
We're losing Rob. Well, Rob will hopefully get back soon. He's not yet. So Mike, why don't you
Sure. So, I mentioned this earlier, our teams work very closely together. I think unusually so from my experience with other offices, and that we're involved at the invention disclosure stage. So it's really a collaborative decision as the project makes progress, whether they have to do a lot of research in-house and it's going to be a long time, or that we have the right person that might be able to add value, even if it's not going to be a startup, but they're on the venture team for whatever reason, that they engage. And so it's a little more gray with us as to whether a project is it's a startup project only, or it's going to be a licensed or traditional industry. And as a result, we flip sometimes. So we've had projects that were, they're going to be a startup, and they're going to be a startup, and they're going to form a company, and then all of a sudden we get a strategic partner or somebody from industry who's like, I am really interested, our company's really interested in this, and a quick decision was made, a licensing opportunity is here. And in that situation, I'm not going to speak to it specifically, but the graduate student ended up going to the company, and it's been an amazing opportunity for her in the cement sector. So that was a really cool story. We've had many where licensing team member has been talking to a faculty member and said, that's an interesting discovery, after they've put their invention disclosure in. And we love to ask the question, what else are you working on? And that quickly, Dick Greeley from our office quickly turned into a startup called Aquarius, which is a fintech play in the water space. And it was the what else you were working on. I'm working on this water thing. No one's going to be really interested. And Dick was astute enough to go, no, we're very interested in that. So we're a little more nebulous in that. We do have a startup pipeline, obviously. And some faculty member and grad students come into the office and go, we want to do a startup. And obviously we engage in the startup process then right from the get-go. But many, it's an evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's nice to see that you're involved at different points in the process. Mm-hmm. Basically, people can start engaging you at multiple points in the process itself. So,
and I think it's fortunate because we have a large in-house mentor team, which I think is unusual, and that right. The only reason that happens is because of the support of the state. It would be half the size that it is now without that support. We'd still have it without doubt, but
Right.
it's incredibly valuable. So that's been an awesome asset to have. Most venture teams don't have 11 in-house mentors.
Well, and so, yeah, right. No, I don't know if there are maybe others, but I'm not as aware of them.
Yeah, either.
Well, while we're waiting for Rob to join back in, how do you help facilitate the decision to form a startup or not? Are you helping the PI come to that decision? Is it a joint decision with significant input from your office? How are you helping that?
So honestly, yes to all the above. There are some projects that are very mature and fast moving, especially in the software space, industry wide. And they have a good vision in mind. They've already partnered and they're off and running and they don't need a lot of help from us. Hey, Rob.
Hey, everybody should use Spectrum Internet.
I'll finish and then we'll come back to you since I'm in the middle of an answer, if that's okay. So we've had projects like that. May Mobility is a very well-known one. It grew and matured. It's an interesting story. It grew and matured, a lot of it inside the university. It signed its license and had venture capital within weeks of launching. So that's obviously we didn't have to engage that much once a company was up and running. What's interesting is the faculty member behind that had engaged with our office previously on something that didn't work out. But he learned a lot from that experience, and as a result, they were able, and the input that our team was able to give to them, and why this should be a no-go rather than a go. And so it was a valuable experience. So they worked very closely with us, in getting that out. Others need a lot of handholding. I mean, the big factors of most of our projects are business talent and funding. So we have great inventors and science experience, and there goes Rob again. But they don't have, they haven't done sales, they haven't raised investment capital, they've never formed a company, or they've read something on the internet that's not entirely accurate. So we do spend a lot of time in company formation and making sure that the technology is going down the right path and giving the advice for that. We obviously don't do that work ourselves. And then we have Diane Buis from our office concentrates on talent and helping team formation. And she's done a fantastic job in finding, it's not just our mentors and residents who end up running companies. And that's really not the mission of the mentors and residents, so we're okay with them doing that on occasion. It's getting the right team involved and getting the company set up outside and tapping into the resources they have. We're really hardcore on operating agreements. So we've seen many new companies who have launched without a good operating agreement, somewhat large teams, and things go bad, and that often leads to the end of a company. We've also seen situations where an operating agreement was there at the beginning. There were partner disputes. Those were resolved. Some partners were no longer with the company, but because of the operating agreement, those were cleanly handled, painful, but cleanly handled, and the company went on.
So one of the things that, and while Rob rejoins us, hopefully the internet will work again. It would not be a webinar these days, right? Without technical problems, as we talked about, even in our
I just sabotaged him because I wanted to talk the whole time.
Right. I wanted to actually ask you a quick question about the Michigan Growth Capital Symposium.
Midwest. It
Midwest.
Its name
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That was, a total slip of the. Just looking.
Dr. Brophy wouldn't forgive me if I didn't fix that.
So with how, because that seems to be an organization that really kind of has helped the region. We talked before about regional investors, non-regional investors. First of all, how did
MGCS.
Yeah, how did it come about? And how has it been helpful both with regional and non-regional investors?
Dr. Brophy, David Brophy out of the Ross School, and he's a legend in the venture space, taught many people who've come through Michigan and ended up in the venture capital industry, started this as a way to basically raise awareness well over 30 years ago, maybe even 35 years ago, to bring typically alumni VC people to the state to show activity and have discussions and help the community understand what the venture capital industry is about. That has grown over the years tremendously. It's evolving right now because Dr. Brophy's retiring, and the event had to be virtual this year, unfortunately, but they still pulled it off, and companies were able to make pitches, and it was well attended. But that event is really to bring outsiders in, and that by bringing outside investors in, the regional investors have an opportunity to engage where they may not have otherwise without having to travel to the coast. And as a result of the activity, and I would say this generally in the Midwest, it's not just Michigan, but obviously Michigan's played a big role in it. That engagement has raised the profile and the awareness of what's going on in the Midwest and the activity that's going on there. Obviously, especially at Michigan. And I think, I don't know where the Osage relationship initially started, but did you even become aware of us because of that kind of activity? Or was it you're researching and said, oh, we got to sign up Michigan? So I wasn't around when that started. So
I wasn't either.
Yeah. So, getting the word out that this is, a viable, interesting place. And I would also throw out the activity that's going on in Detroit. With Michigan, because we're going to have a bigger presence there, but also the turnaround in Detroit and the activity that's going on there has generated a lot of interest.
So we got a comment in that we started working with Michigan because Lou left.
There we go. Thanks,
right,
Lou.
Hi guys. Finally figured out how to use the phone.
Yeah, I think the phone's probably the best way to go. No worries at all.
Glad you're back.
So Rob, actually, maybe you could comment. We have another question. Well, actually, let's go back to the regional versus non-regional investors. Is there any difference that you have, and Rob, in cultivating those regional versus non-regional investor relationships? Or are there different tactics you use?
I would say I am much more proactive with the local investment groups. I think that one of the things that the questions we're going to get if we show something to a national investor is, what does the local investor think of this? And so we try to make sure that they're up to date on what's going on in our portfolio. I have regular meetings with Hatteras Venture Partners here in Durham, as well as a couple of other locals, as well as the angel groups. Yeah.
That's helpful. One of the comments we have from the audience, Mike, is whether that you can provide an example of a University of Michigan startup operating agreement. Is there like a template out there that?
No, so we don't use a template. Okay. What we advise, there's always a danger of giving legal advice in these kind of situations, and that is not our role. So we do encourage teams when they're getting to that stage to work with a local attorney, and we're happy to review those agreements, but we don't provide them. Okay. NDAs, those kind of things, certainly we do that. Less legal, technical, or liability issues. But given that we're typically an equity owner in the startup, providing anything beyond a very general template, which isn't going to provide much value to anybody, we encourage them to use legal services to get that done.
Another question we had was about the fact that we were talking about this before, but before Rob's internet cut out, about if your new ventures team is separated from your tech transfer offices, how management of that might work and how it would be different than what you currently have. And Rob, let's start off with you. Do you have any advice for if the new ventures team is located in a separate office or department, how to work with them? I know that you both are in these integrated offices, but you probably have seen other ones that are not.
Yeah, I think it's about making sure that there's open communication. One of the things that we've tried to do, and we've been explicit about, is that the New Ventures Group is an advocate for the faculty and an advocate for the startup company, and insofar as we won't come and negotiate with Duke. I mean, that's something we can't do, but we can provide input that like, hey, if you want, Duke to indemnify you, you're probably not going to get that license done. And we can work as connectors to, help facilitate negotiations when needs be. And I think that sort of separation has enabled us to be, honest brokers and be viewed as such and trustworthy advisors. And so I think that's an advantage of being separate, that would be maybe even magnified by not reporting up through the same group. But I would say advice, gosh, it's really, we rely so much on the invention managers for our pipeline, that having a close relationship and making sure that we stay in touch is crucial.
Robin, sorry, Mike, anything you want to add to that?
No, I would agree with that. The value of being in-house together, and this is a topic that has come up over the years, would it make sense to be separate? There are certain advantages, I think, especially in the venture side, especially for those offices that are fortunate to have funds. Obviously, if it's somewhat outside the university, you may not have to go through the approval process, especially a public university like U of M has to go through. But being close to the licensing team or the tech transfer office is critical. I don't see another way around it. If they're going to be focused on university technologies, if it's a broader focus, and some of them are like this, where they're also engaging with student projects, that's a different matter. Our office doesn't do that, but I know of several do. Some even have economic development components intentionally embedded in them that do community work. That I get why there needs to be a separation there, because obviously the tech transfer office has a more narrow focus. But nevertheless, for commercializing the activity that's going on inside the university research enterprise, staying engaged with departments and making sure that they're aware of the activity, because the licensing team is doing that separately in those situations. And getting as close to the licensing team so that when the time is right, they're at least making introductions that they may have opportunities that a venture team wouldn't have is important.
Yeah. So we are at the top of the hour right now. I know that a number of our attendees are going to need to drop off. There is going to be a survey that people will be receiving when they either sign off from this or otherwise. Please do answer it. We actually base our webinars, including this one, based on the answers to those surveys. So we really appreciate people putting in their feedback on the webinars. We are going to continue to go on for another 15 minutes, half an hour to get these questions answered. If we don't get to everything, we'll answer them otherwise. But I do want to get to more of the audience questions. I have a number of my own questions still left that we had prepared beforehand. So let's get to some of these. So one of the questions we had is, what is VC ready? Which I think is an age-old question at this point, right? How do you determine if the technology is ready for a specific venture capitalist? Mike, do you want to start us off on this one?
So it depends on the VC. You can't give a broad definition there. You have very early stage VC who will put in the first $50,000, even $100,000, pre-seed stage. You have others who don't want to do any investing until there's $5 million in revenue and the company's raised several $1 million. So it varies by sector and by stage of the company and stage of investor interest. So it's an ad hoc process depending on the situation. Software companies typically can raise funding quicker and not need as much capital. So engagement typically happens earlier in those cases. Therapeutics and harder tech like materials, they do a lot more development before there's really engagement. Though again, with the pipeline report, we're making people aware of practically everything we have. And then they get to decide how they want to engage. And it's really not with the vetting, besides the vetting and making sure that there's, good match and we're working with the best people possible. We don't, we're not going to vet to that degree. We let the VCs tell us where they want to engage and how they want to engage. And as long as we want to engage with them with which we mostly do, you know, we let them drive that.
Rob, same question on the VCs.
Yeah.
And something's ready, VC ready.
Yeah, so I mean, we have a handful of venture groups that are pretty close to us. You know, OUP and a couple of others where we'll test the waters with something, and instead of, you know, going out to everyone at once and setting a bunch of meetings, the idea is more to get initial feedback, you know, and with groups that are, you know, quote unquote safe, where, you know, we're not going to the point where, you know, we've sort of blown our opportunity, where they're like, you know, don't come back until you generated more data around this in a year or two, and we don't want to see it before then. I think it also varies a bit on, you know, not just by industry, but within an industry, you know, what's a hot area, you know, what is, and who are the hot faculty. You know, some faculty, they roll out of bed in the morning and people throw money at them. Others, it takes a little bit more of crafting the story. You know, I would say the biggest failure that we could make is to have a venture firm turn us down for a story they didn't understand, right? That we didn't communicate effectively what the opportunity was, and they said no for that reason. So really, for me, it's about, can you tell the story effectively? And the answer can be no at that point, but at least they know what they're saying no to.
Right. You both at this point talked about how you're making introductions between investors and your startups, learning about the investors, what they're interested, when they're going to be interested in it, et cetera. How do you mark success with those introductions? I mean, obviously the major metrics should be is investment, but there's other metrics for success on that. Rob, do you want to start us off maybe talking about how you measure success on those introductions?
Right, and that's actually been a topic with our group of late. You know, I think it's you know, the feedback we get from the investors in terms of, you know, are they, you know, is the story clear? Is the venture ready? You know, are they moving into diligence? What that means? You know, a lot of the challenge that we have is that the technologies are really early, and people who are used to investing in university spinouts understand that. But, you know, there can be a long lag time between making an introduction and seeing an outcome from that. You know, the term sheet that came out of Venture Day last May was presented to the company in February. So that, you know, that's a pretty long lead time. So, you know, we keep incubating things and monitoring them. And, you know, as long as they're staying in bed and staying, you know, interested, you know, that's a potential harbinger of success.
Mm-hmm. Mike, same question.
Yeah, you know, I again, and Rob, I don't want to repeat what's already been said, but you know, many of those, I think many tech transfer offices and new venture teams across the country are reevaluating metrics as the industry changes and evolves and modernizes. So, you know, we're all going to go by autumn, and startups and, you know, venture capital raise, those are easy ones. But, you know, to me, it's re-engagement. You know, if a fund comes back to a team because they want to keep an eye on it, that's a success, even if they never pull the trigger on that. We've also found, and Osage has been an incredible partner in this, in regard to making introductions. It's like, this isn't the right fit for us, but these guys may have something, you should go talk to this fund. That's a success, because that means that the pitch was compelling enough that they're willing to risk their reputation a little bit to make an introduction. And introductions in the venture industry are critical to getting your foot in the door, and especially introductions from other VCs. Obviously, our teams are very biased. We want, you know, quality deal flow, and we want quality pitches, but you know, getting those introductions, and we always tell our teams, you know, thank you for, you know, the opportunity. Who else do you know that might be interested in this? You know, that's a really important question. If you get an answer to that, things have probably gone okay. You know, it might not be ideal. And, you know, that's a really critical metric, because it's rare in this space, especially in things that require a lot of capital, where it's going to be just one lead investor handling the whole deal. So.
Great. So we have a few more questions from our audience here, and I actually think most of these should be pretty quick answer questions for each of you. And then I have a couple more follow-up ones. But so this one asks if you have internal investment funds and you use those internal investments funds on a startup, do those startups that don't get the internal investment funds, do they have a harder time potentially getting external funding eventually? Have you done a comparison of those that are receiving the internal funding and then going out and seeking capital versus those that don't seek the internal funding and going out and seeking capital? Have you seen differences in that? And Mike, I'll start with you.
So I can't speak to Accelerate Blue because obviously that's not up and running yet. We're still fundraising. But this has been an issue in much of my career, especially my work at the MEDC, because we had an investment fund that would invest in Michigan-based companies. And if they didn't get it, people will go, well, then they're not going to be successful in fundraising. That sometimes is the case, but it might not be because our fund didn't invest in them. It could be because they don't deserve to be invested in. So there is a little bit of scapegoating going on in those scenarios. We do have examples, and I'm not going to go into specifics, at U of M where companies were not successful in getting U of M investments or even Osage investments. and that's fine. And they went on to be successful and raise capital from other investors. That's the nature of the game. We have to make these decisions based on the goals and the strategies of the fund, and those can vary widely. And if it doesn't fit for that scenario, that doesn't mean it's not a worthy investment. And people do worry about that, but given the capital situation, especially in the state of Michigan and the shortage of it, that's a downside we think is well worth the risk, especially at the pre-seed level.
Right, and the funds are limited too. I mean,
right. You can't do every deal.
You have to make choices.
We will not invest in every tech company when Accelerate Blue is stood up.
Right. Rob, same question on internal funding and success rates, et cetera.
Yeah, our office doesn't have any sort of funds to put to work at this point, but it's something we've thought about in the context of Deerfield and OUP and relationships that we have where people do see a lot of stuff early, and if they pass, what's wrong with it? And I think what I've found, in having conversations about that, does that put a black mark on something? Is that, I don't know if you've heard that apparently venture people have ego. This is new to me, and they want to find the thing that somebody else missed. And if it's interesting technology, they'll roll up their sleeves and take a look. And so I don't see that as a black mark at all. I would say that things that do receive investment from internal funds, hopefully that's an enriched target group, and so maybe they're more likely to get follow-on investment just because of that, and also the fact that the technology gets more advanced based on the investment that happens. But I wouldn't look at it as a negative.
The next question is about operating agreements, what the operating agreements do. Does it lay out the founder's roles and the equity and what happens if the co-founder departs, et cetera? So could you just explain a little bit more about operating agreements, Mike? Sure.
So, there's simple operating agreements and complex operating agreements. So they do, a good one will address many of those positions. And it's a wonderful document because it really gets the partners to decide when everyone's excited about the new opportunity. But what if things head south? So we're all on the same side of the table right now. Let's figure out if one partner needs to leave, or if the majority of partners want a partner to leave. What are the circumstances where that is allowed? And what are the conditions that, and the settlement of that decision, how it will operate? So there is vesting, there could be vesting periods involved. There can be removal clauses, beyond just the obvious, if someone does something incredibly egregious or criminal, but this isn't working. We need to bring somebody new in. And that's the more common scenario. And if you do that when everyone's in the right frame of mind, there's little if no contention because everyone's excited about the new opportunity. You do it up front. Then when things get contentious, and hopefully that doesn't happen, but it does, you can point to that and go, look, this is what we agreed to. And so it's unique to each company, but the beauty of it is you have a lawyer help you craft it, but the partners in the company, the owners of the company, the founders of the company, they're the ones who get to decide the terms where if things head south, for whatever reason, this is how we're going to resolve that issue. If things don't head south, usually operating agreements aren't that valuable because things are going well. But how many startups don't hit a hiccup? So.
Right. Rob, is there anything you wanted to add on that one?
No, we don't. Nope, we don't have anything on that.
Okay. Board seats. Do you take board seats on your startups? Rob, do you?
No, we don't.
Okay.
But one of the things that we've talked about is making them pulling together a board of directors, something that's a milestone in the license. And we're still kind of exploring what that might look like.
Right.
Yeah, we push for boards, but we're the same. We don't take board seats. Even when we have Accelerate Blue, we may take observer rights in some situations, and the Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund does that on occasion. Mm-hmm. But we have too much work to do board seat type work.
And so you don't insist on.
Yeah.
Apologize for
no, that's okay.
I was going to say, so you wouldn't insist on observer board seat necessarily.
No, it'll depend on the situation and what kind of board they formed. If there's good people at the table, then no. We've done it voluntarily even without the fund, where it's like, all right, they need some help at that level, and so it's unofficial, but never a board seat that I'm aware of.
We do take observer rights in some of our startups.
Okay.
But not a voting board seat.
Okay. All right. Pipeline management tools. This person's asking about a specific one. Rob, I know your pipeline management, at least the sheet that you send out is an Excel sheet, but what are you using for your pipeline management tools as far as, I think, databases or anything like that?
Yeah, we use Salesforce.com, and that's good for some things, not so good for others. But there's certainly a big sunk cost associated with it at this point, with all of our data entered into it. Right. We've started using Airtable to track some other things that we do in terms of venture relationships and talent pools. But we use Salesforce for pipeline management. Okay,
great. Yeah, Mike.
We use Wellspring Sophia, so our pipeline report is generated through that. Before things changed, we were exploring Salesforce as well. Obviously, use Excel extensively. We have reports that come out of PitchBook as well, so PitchBook has the ability to give us updates on that. But primarily, the reports generated through Sophia.
Okay. So let's talk about the current situation, obviously, that we're in. We're in a pandemic. How have programs changed? How, a lot of have you been doing any startup events in digital formats like this? Obviously, you're doing this one, but we were doing these before that. But, I imagine there's a lot of events you've attended. Have you put on any events through a digital format? What has worked? If you have, what has worked, what hasn't, and what tools have you used? Obviously, we all know Zoom very well now, but and sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. But so, what tools have you been using? What programs have you been putting on? Rob, do you want to start us off here?
Yeah, we canceled our venture day in May, hoping to reschedule for the fall in person, which is looking less likely. So we were actually going to co-host that with UNC, and so we're just starting to re-engage and think about what that's gonna look like this fall. So haven't had firsthand experience of putting on virtual events just yet, but I'll keep you posted. Yeah,
Mike.
Same situation. We have our Celebrate Invention Day is in the fall. We hope we can do it in person, but we're starting to make plans to do it virtually, given the uncertainty. And it's a big event, so bringing that many people together probably wouldn't be wise. I had the Midwest Growth Capital Symposium was held recently, and that was done virtually. I was not involved in the system, so I don't recall what they used. I can certainly pass it along. It was clunky, and not obviously not. You don't get the same serendipity you would at an event in person and meeting with people. But it did have the and again, I'm glad to share the tool when I dig up the name. Did have the opportunity to have somewhat spontaneous meetings in a private, private virtual meeting room or planned meetings outside of the panel discussions. And you'd sign up for a panel, you go watch the panel, and then you'd leave. And those, I think that's going to be one of the great things that comes out of this, is that those tools weren't really proactively used, and now everyone has to use them. So it's going to push them forward. I think they'll improve pretty dramatically over the next year or two.
Right.
It's a great opportunity. Yeah. Someone should launch a startup.
Right. Right. Perhaps a better way to do pitching startup.
Yeah.
Now we've been involved with a number now of online, or at least attending a lot of online pitch competitions. We're involved with the Equalize 21 on June 25th. I think a lot of it is practice ahead of time, honestly. Run through everything and make sure everyone can just deal with the fact that things are going to go wrong. It's not going to go exactly like everyone planned. Just as today is evidence.
When does that ever happen? When does that ever happen?
Not only
I'm not familiar with this.
Right. And it's just, but fortunately, everyone's just much more accepting of that, that it's okay. We'll continue going. So maybe that's also help us be a little more relaxed on when things do go wrong. But yeah, that's the main thing I think that I would advise people on doing these online events is do practice and run through everything beforehand, so you know how certain things are going to happen, and all of your participants run through beforehand too.
Yeah, planning for when things go south is really key, because it's kind of predictable. It's going to be connectivity, or the video's going to freeze. So, we didn't plan for one of us disappearing for 10 minutes, but.
Yeah. So, let's see. We have one more question from the audience. How do you successfully entice your startups to remain in touch with the university and provide updates on their funding and development? Mike, do you want to start us off on this one?
Sure. So that's actually a really great question. Some of it is just that you've built such a close relationship with the company. So as they leave the nest of the university and maybe move to a different part of the country, that relationship stays, valuable for a variety of reasons, just because you've developed this, close, you care about the company and they care about the university, and so they want to stay engaged. So those are easier. But to be honest, many of our companies, once they've been out a few years, they don't engage with us that much, except through the licensing agreement terms. So we have a team that, if they have milestones in their license, obviously that has to continue. So it's hard to keep track of investing events and stuff like that once we're not helping them really that much anymore. I think the pipeline report has actually helped with that, because we reach out to every startup that's still in existence and say, do you have a fundraising event? Do you want to be on the tab? We won't put them on there even if they're fundraising unless they give us that permission, but there's that contact now. And they're like, oh, you guys are doing that? And even though we've been doing that for 2 years, we still get that response. So that's been, I think, valuable. And then, I sound like a PitchBook salesperson. We go to PitchBook and we get updates on team changes and investment, and because those are tracked, especially if they've successfully raised a round.
Maybe we can get them to start sponsoring our webinar.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Right. Rob, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, it's mostly interaction through sending breach letters. No, I'm just kidding. Annual reports are helpful for sure. And then, like Mike said, we develop these relationships over time. And as we provide a lot of value up front, I think that value can continue through the networks that we have and the relationships that we have outside of the university, and making connections for them.
Robin Racer did write into me and asked me to let everyone know about a webinar that's akin to this, that other people if you're interested in this subject, you may be interested in as well. So she and Orna Herskowitz and John Soderstrom and Jack Miner are doing a webinar on June 25th that's entitled University Startups Improving the Economy of the Walking Dead. So go to Autumn if you are interested potentially in that. So Robin, I did my plug.
Hi, Robin.
And I'm going to ask one last question to you. We don't have any more questions left, I think, from the audience. Oh, actually, maybe we do. I apologize. I'm going to read those over while I ask you this question. We do have like 8 more minutes left. So my question to you actually was, for those tech transfer offices or universities that don't have a dedicated new ventures person or team, what are your top pieces of advice for cultivating investor relationships for them? You know, so this is probably going to be done by other members of the team, licensing or other groups, members on that particular team. Is there anything in particular that you would advise them on helping cultivate those investor relationships? And then I'll ask you these couple more questions that I have from the audience. And sorry, Mike, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'm thinking. So we've worked with a few small schools through the grant program that I oversee that helps support our mentors. It's called the Technology Transfer Talent Network. And we do have the opportunity to support commercialization activity at schools that they don't even have tech transfer teams really. They might have one person who does that part-time. So, you know, working with outside groups, tapping into their capabilities, especially if they have an interest in the school. If the school's fortunate enough to have a business school, they probably have ties to the venture community, and certainly should, you know, look into that. LinkedIn. You'll find alumni that you are tied to, or that somebody on your team is tied to, even if it's a very small team. And it might be 2 or 3 degrees of separation, but, you know, for the most part, investors do want to hear about new things. And if they have a tie to a school, they might have that opportunity. Or somebody at the school might have a relationship. Maybe it's not even in the business school. So, you know, it's a tough situation to be in. But, you know, there are ways to make that connection.
Those are really good pieces of advice. Rob, your thoughts on helping these people without a team like yours?
Yeah, great points, Mike. And I'll sort of add to that, you know, because we've gone through that transition, you know, in the time that I've been at Duke. And I would say the biggest thing is to try and break down the silos among the invention managers as much as you can. You know, everybody kind of knows their own portfolio. You know, one of the advantages of having a person like me or Mike is that, you know, we're a single point of contact that knows what's spinning out of the university. So keep a list, what's interesting, what looks has potential, and make sure that you communicate among your team so that everybody sort of knows what's on that list. I would say, you know, learn how to tell stories in the way that VCs are used to hearing them. You know, I talked about this a little bit earlier. You know, that the academics are really focused on highlighting the clever nature of, you know, the science that they do. The story can absolutely be a scientific story, and it probably needs to be if you don't have, you know, a mentor in residence program helping coach these people. But, you know, have it highlight unmet needs, what the solution is, and the proof that's been generated to date. And then, you know, the final thing I would say is, you know, look for free resources and engage them. You know, even before we had a New Venture Fellows program, I would engage, I'm a Fuqua alum, you know, the Duke Business School. I would engage Fuqua students through a mentored study program and get them, you know, working on things that were going to become startups. You know, and you got to make sure though that this is a net positive for the group. You know, I told them all up front that if it takes me more time to teach you to do something than it would take me to do it myself, then you're destroying value. So you be careful about, you know, casting too wide a net. Be really careful about selecting the right people. But, you know, free resources are potentially helpful on that front in developing stories and doing sort of competitive analysis type of work.
Great. We just have a couple minutes left. I do want to get to these questions quickly, so if you can provide some quick answers to them. What level of entrepreneurial education do your New Ventures groups provide to faculty, students, and others? Or is it another group that provides this education, such as business schools? Rob?
Yeah, I would say it's mostly through the business school and the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Initiative. I think it's, you know, the educational stuff that we do is through coaching. I do teach a class through the business school where we take technologies out of my portfolio and put a team of students around them to basically build out the business case. We call it the New Venture Clinic. That's been a real, I think that's been a success as well, but it's mostly through other groups.
Okay, great. Mike, same question. You're on mute, Mike.
We're the same. We don't directly, teach classes or anything like that. David Olson, one of our mentors in residence, does teach at the med school, but we're very fortunate that we have entrepreneurship centers at several schools across campus. Fast Forward Medical Innovation Group at med school, Center for Entrepreneurship at engineering, the Zellery Institute at the business school. Obviously, they're very engaged in that activity. But even the theater, music, and dance has an entrepreneurship center. So there's places for them to learn that. And then we add value by our coaching and mentoring in residence, but we don't do it on a formal basis.
Great. And our last question is about success stories and the end game about, are there articles out there that people could be referred to about the win of all stakeholders during an exit? And actually, I think for this one, maybe you could think about that and we could follow up with the group on some possible articles on that. I'd appreciate that. Okay?
Sounds good.
Great. So we are, great. We are reaching the end of our webinar. Yes, we are 2 minutes shy of the hour and a half that I wasn't sure we were going to use all of it, but we did. So thank you so much for everyone attending. Like I mentioned, we do have this survey. We would very much like you to respond to that. We already put this in the chat box, but you should also receive it as you sign off. Mike and Rob, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your expertise. Thank you for working through the technical issues. We know this is all an issue, but you were champions through all of it. Thank you so much for our audience also sticking with us. Obviously, a lot of you did stick around for this entire time and for attending this webinar. Please, everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope to see you on another webinar soon. Thanks again, Mike and Rob. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
You guys be well.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Take care.
All right.
Good. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.